Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to the modding of Isaac with Lyte. And today, we're going to work on triggering events when your enemies die. Now, we don't have a mod callback to do this directly, but we can write code that is just as good. Maybe not just as good, but it's effective. It gets the job done. And if we don't have the things we need, we make the things we need. That's what it means to be a programmer. So let's head on into the game, get on started, and see what this can do for us. We're just going to start with Isaac. We're going to give ourselves Magic Mushroom, because we're going to be killing things, and this is a tutorial, so we want them to die relatively quickly. So here we are with our Magic Mush, and we have an enemy. We kill him, he gives us a coin. If we head down here, we've got several enemies. Each one of them gives us a coin. Every time. Now, there are certain types of enemies that are a bit of a concern when doing this sort of thing, because there are multi-phase enemies, there are fires, which could or could not count as an enemy, depending on your mood, whether orange or yellow. These guys, they're pretty ordinary. But you'll notice that those fancy ring flies didn't give me any coins. Well, that's a side effect of one of the things we do in the code. If you want to counteract that, you can. I personally feel not getting coins from those might be a bit of a problem. So we should add a little bit to the code for this episode to account for those guys. Then we head into the boss room. Hey, look, it's Famine. Well, each one of these things he spawns should give us a coin, but one thing that might also give us a coin is when he splits apart. Thankfully it didn't. Certain enemies, when they change form, will give you a penny. For example, those little guys that chase you down, when you shoot them, they lose their head and become the little guys that walk. Those die when they change form, and thus you would get a penny. Famine, it didn't look like he did that to us. So, with those things in mind, there's a couple of other types of enemies that lead to interesting behaviors. Comparable to those flies that go around in a circle, there's our good friend Pin. Pin is made up of several entities. Each of those body segments is itself an independent entity. That's how you get that nice fluid movement as he moves around, and the ability for him to do the backtracking that he does when he bounces off of things. It just gives him a lot of freedom in his movement characteristics. But when we kill him, we only get one coin, because otherwise you'd get a coin for each body segment. This holds true for Skull-X, because Skull-X is just a Pin variant, and also Larry Jr. Larry Jr. comes in various parts. Do you want to get a coin for every part that dies? Do you want one coin per Larry Jr.? Now that's a decision you can make on your own. I'm just showing you what it takes to be able to do it. So let's head over to the code. We'll fix that little bit with the rotating flies, and I'll show you some interesting behaviors if you were to leave any of the bits out. We'll be going back and forth between the code and the game quite a bit, so let's get going. What you see on the screen is all but one line of the code. The last line, we're adding the callback. Whenever I say the word callback, I mean this entire function. So whenever I say, so what's in your callback? I mean, what is inside of this function? What gets run when we have this sort of event? This line right here is not your callback. This is where you add your callback. Which callback? Mod on update, which is this function. And then that gets called back on update. So post update is when we call this function, which is the callback, and we do all of this stuff. Now, I'm using MC post update because we don't need the player for these activities. So many other episodes I use post p-effect update because we need the player. This time, no, we're just looking at the enemies. We don't need the player. So on update, we get all of the room entities and loop over them, because this is the only way we've got for inspecting what's going on. You can't just say, I don't know. I don't know what you think can happen. But you can't just do entity NPC dot whatever. The entity NPC is not a particular enemy. It's not every enemy. It's not an enemy. It's an abstract concept of what an enemy might be. So you always want to use some loop like this. Now, this is not the only type of loop that works here. Other people like taking get room entities and throwing it into a variable called entities, and then looping over the indices of that table. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to the number of entities. Because you can use the notation octothorpe entities, this right here, to represent how many things are in the entities table. And so you step through each of those and you get each of those entities in turn and work with them. You get to the same point either way. I just personally prefer having a variable called entity that is a reference to a particular entity. It's just my style. So we go through each entity and then we grab its custom data. So entity get data. So this grabs a table, starts out empty, that we put our custom things in. This is not for standard in-game things. This is just a blank slate for us to do extra stuff that we need. And then we're going to convert the entity to an NPC, because we don't care about coins. We don't care about anything except enemies. So we're not getting beggars with this. We're not getting slot machines, coins, hearts, nothing. Only our enemies. Now, if you run this line of code and it's a pickup, or it's a slot machine, or it's anything but an NPC, entity itself will be nil. The conversion fails. And so if you go if entity, it goes, no, that's nothing. We're done. But if it does happen to be an enemy, then you have to check, well, is it an active enemy? Now for me, I use active enemy here because I don't want it to count shopkeepers or fires. If you want shopkeepers or fires, then you could just change this to regular old is enemy. Not necessarily an active one. I add an additional comment here. If you're not familiar with comments, if you put in 2 dashes, it creates text that is not run. It's just there for human reference. And I put that here because this is a good place to check if you're checking for a particular type of enemy. So if we were looking for just regular old flies, we would include entity.type equals entitytype.entityFly. And then this would only proc when you kill a fly. But you can have it check for whatever you like. Flies, horfs, whatever those meat things are called. Whatever you like, you can check for it. So, that's going, okay, is it an entity? Is it an active enemy? Great. We separate the if here because we need to check a couple of different things. Because not only are we checking if it's dead, we're also checking if it's part of a hybrid thing. Well, the thing about those circling flies is that they are part of a hybrid. There is an invisible, immortal thingamajig in the middle that tells them what to do. Or they're looking at each other or something, but they all have a parent. So that's what's causing them to not drop coins. It's saying, oh, you've got a parent just like the body segments of Pin, Larry Jr. and Skull-X? Oh, then you don't get a coin. Well, let's head over to the documentation and find those flies. So if you're ever looking for something that you don't know the number of, you don't know the name of, you can come into modules, enumerations, and then we're going to look in entity type right here. And then it lists all of the different types of entities. Now, most of these are enemies, and it's a big, long list. So when in doubt, Control F. And now here, you've actually got the numbers of all sorts of different things. Now, the numbers aren't really what we're here for. We want to get to the part where it's big ol' entity underscore and then stuff. So we've got entity fly, we've got entity attack fly, entity boom fly, eternal fly, fly L2, full fly, and dart fly. Ooh, and hush fly. So it would lead me to believe that those are actually variants of the regular fly. So sometimes the documentation doesn't quite get the job done. And so you need to go to the resources. So you grab yourself a folder, go into Rebirth, Resources, and then you look in entities2.xml. This also lists all of the entities, and you go Control F, fly. And then you look at all of the different flies. So you got the fly orbital, so that's pretty fly. Attack fly, no. Anything that is entity 3, that's a familiar, that's not what you're looking for. 13, we have regular old fly. Well, this is 13.0, there is no 13.1, it would seem. Now, you ask yourself, what's a pooter? Well, a pooter is... I don't really know. You can always check the bestiary. You've got attack flies. Are these the circling flies? Maybe. Maybe not. Probably the regular flies are black. The attack flies are the red ones. And so you just keep looking through. Boom flies are probably the ones that explode. Red boom flies are the ones that explode into tears. Brown boom fly, oh yeah. Sucker. Oh. That's an interesting one. Motor. Eternal fly. Level 2 fly. Ring fly. Here we are. We've got ourselves a ring fly. Are those the ones that go in a circle? Possibly. We're going to assume they are. Because they only collide with walls. They are a fly, and their name kind of implies that they are a thing that goes around in circles. But their number is awfully high. So you wonder, did they come into existence after Brownie? So these are the things that you think about when going through and figuring out, are they really what you're looking for? And when in doubt, try it. So we're going to assume that these are right. And so we're going to add a little thing here going else if entity.parent NPC and not entity.type equals 222. So you hold off on that for just 1 second because you're like, well, 222, you're generally supposed to avoid that if possible. So we come back into our good old-fashioned Luidox here and search for 222. Hey, look, entity ring of flies. And I know a lot of you would be tempted to go copy, paste, but don't. Because that right there, all caps, entity ring of flies, means nothing. On its own, that is a completely valueless thing. What we wanted was entity type dot entity ring of flies. Because in these documentations, you've got this entity ring of flies as part of entity type. So now, if it has a parent and it's not the ring of flies, you set it to died, being true. Well, we're essentially pre-killing the things that shouldn't give us a coin. It's not exactly intuitive, but essentially you're saying it shouldn't give you the death reward. And you do that before it dies, such that you don't have to worry about it later. So we've gone over adding the callback. We've got our callback here. We loop over every entity. We get our blank table of data, which we're going to add died to. That's what this is doing. We check if it is an enemy. If it's active, then we check, is it dead or not dead? If it's not dead yet, you check whether or not it's Ring of Flies or has a parent. If it has a parent and is not Ring of Flies, you pre-kill it. So the extra body segments of Pin, Larry Jr., and Skolex. Now that's not the only use for data.died, because we check two different types of death right here in this if statement. We ask the game, hey, is this thing dead? And it goes, sure. Then we ask our code, is it already dead? Because you don't want to proc it for death after it's already died once. You might not think this is necessary, but oh, is it necessary? So you check both of these. If the game thinks it's dead and your code does not, then we say to our code, oh, it's dead now. Data.died is true. Then we do the thing. This is also a good place for an if statement. I put this here for your reference, because here's another place where you can check if it's a particular type of enemy. Or you roll a die and it does something random. Or you do all sorts of possibilities here. Here you need to be a programmer and decide what do you want, and then you make it do it. For me, all I do is spawn a single pen at the entity's position with the entity's velocity. Very simple. Here's the type, here's the variant, there's the subtype, position, velocity, spawner. Now, a lot of these lines you might not have thought were necessary, because I've seen someone say, oh, if you want to proc something when something dies, all you need is if entity is enemy and entity is dead. That's all you need. You're good to go. Well, let me show you the ramifications of doing that. So we'll keep it being an enemy. We will remove our code for it being dead by our custom code. We'll leave this down here. That doesn't much matter. But we remove this line. Heck, we don't even need to remove that. All we're removing is the check for whether or not our code thinks it's dead. It's all we removed, just whether or not our code thinks it's dead. So we save this. We head back over into Isaac. We reload our mod. Luamod Pinata. And then let's actually spawn a couple of hearts. I took more damage than I should have. Heart is, let's see, 5, 10, 5. And then let's spawn Monstro. He should be 20, I think. Our good friend Monstro. He's right on top of us. So, Monstro here is a slightly interesting case because, well, he's got a custom death animation. So, he stays dead for longer than your average enemy. Yeah. So if you don't check if they're dead already, according to your code, look at how long he was dead So if you were counting for, say, power up from blood, I'm looking at you, person in my Discord, this is what happens. You would get all of those charges just from killing one monstro. And all I did was remove one line of code that most people didn't think was necessary. Now, in most cases, you don't need it. Your average enemy dies for a single frame. It will just proc once, you're done. Monstro takes forever. Any other enemy that similarly takes a long time to die will proc similarly often. Whew, well that's rough. So let's head back over into the code. What are some other things that don't necessarily seem necessary? Well, for one, the fact that it's an enemy at all. Like, what else is going to be dead? Well, it turns out there are a lot of things that can die, and in very interesting ways. So we remove the check for, is it even an enemy? Like, there's nothing here that really requires it to be an NPC. So we hit save. We head back over into Isaac. We reload our mod. And now, well, there are a couple of, well, two things in particular that can die that I find rather interesting. Number one is, oh, I suppose tears hitting there are not actually dying? Oh, I might also not have a good, I might have broken something else. So real quick, I'm gonna check my log, because you should always check your log files, people. Log files tell you about all sorts of errors that you accrue that you didn't really notice. Oh, I see what it is. So back here in the code, we forgot to comment out this and. An extra and before then will cause problems. So we reload, pinata, and now when we shoot the walls, our tears die and spawn a coin. So, if you want to do something when a tear collides with something, all you have to do is check if it's dead. Now, I'm actually going to go back to the code and turn off not died again to see an interesting effect when you miss both of those things. So now we're going to pick up this penny. And it ends up dropping a lot of pennies all at once. Because the pennies also die for more than a single frame. That pickup animation leaves it dying for several frames. So if you wanted to do a thing for picking things up, you could detect whether or not the pickup is dying instead of playing the pickup animation. But again, you need to make sure you can only pick it up once, or else you'll pick it up several times in a single death animation. So there are a few things out there that can die that you wouldn't expect to die, and there are a couple of fine details that you need to keep in mind for the different ways different things can both live and die. So let's head back to the code. We'll set it back to its good, fully working standing, including all of the different parts for working with enemies. I have a lot of comments in here to help you out along the way of modifying this to your needs, because you can have it work for several different enemies. You can have it do several different things for the same enemy. There might be some things that have parents that act in a way that you don't like. Sort of like we saw with the Ring of Flies. You want to make sure for all the things in the game, it does what you intend. Never just let it do whatever it wants. Make sure it does what you want. But that's enough for this episode. The next one will most likely be on crawl spaces and black markets. So I will see you in the next episode of the Modding of Isaac with Lyte.